reality, one God, one life, one way, one reality, one God, one life, one way, one reality, one God, one life, one way, one reality.
Is this growing crowd of growing non-Jews that have been brought into this Messianic Jewish movement for obvious or unobvious reasons. And there arises a situation among the hierarchy. What are we going to do with this vast amount of non-Jews coming into this Jewish Messianic movement? So the big issue becomes, do we circumcise them and make them full proselytes, or is there another way of allowing these people to come into this Jewish Messianic movement?
Well, and if I may, at this time period, this was actually something that they dealt with all the time.
Exactly.
Because there were two schools of thought.
Right.
One that said you have to have it, and one that said no, you don't.
Exactly. You got the controversy, we call it controversy between Hillel and Shammai. Whereas Hillel would readily receive converts, Shammai would not. And you have a great story, Talmudic stories about this reception of converts and non-reception of converts. Mm-hmm. And Shammai might even go to the point of saying that even if you converted, you still wasn't going to make it into the world to come. But there was this controversy between them, and so this controversy still raged among the people of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so it would be seen, especially among this group also, because now you have this large influx of non-Jewish people coming into this Jewish Messianic movement, mm-hmm. and what are we going to do with them?
Yeah.
So in Acts 15, you actually have what I call a kind of it's not the real Sanhedrin, mm-hmm. but it is a Sanhedrin that is convening for this Messianic group. It's not the real Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. That Sanhedrin dealt specifically with everything for the Jewish people. But it seems that this Messianic Jewish group had decided to come up with their own Sanhedrin, whether it would be a small Sanhedrin or actually 71, but there's this convening of this leadership, which seems to be like a Sanhedrin court type thing, because they're going to listen to the debates, mm-hmm. and then there has to be some kind of decision that's made of what are we going to do with all these non-Jews. Mm-hmm. So in Acts 15 it starts out that you had two different factions that were going out and teaching the non-Jews. Mm-hmm. You have one faction that's going out and really telling them about the old Messianic idea, but they're also teaching them that you have to be full converts mm-hmm. to belong to this Messianic group, right? You had one other faction, which basically was one guy by the name of Paul. He goes out and he's teaching that you don't have to do that, mm-hmm. right? So all of a sudden there's a conflict within the leadership. Mm-hmm. And so now there's got to be a decision made. What do we do with these non-Jews? In other words, do we take the Shammai perspective?
Which was actually in power at the time.
Exactly. Do we take the Shammai perspective that says they have to be full converts? Or do we go with a more lenient way? Okay? And we'll talk about the lenient way in a minute. So it says in Acts 15, it says, certain men which came down from Judea, they're coming out of the southern area, they taught the brethren and said, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. You can't be delivered. Right? In other words, you have no place in the world to come. Mm-hmm. That's really what they're saying. It's not about soteriological salvation. But if you don't, you might join our group, but if you don't go the full route of conversion, you don't have any place in the world to come. That's really what they're saying. This soteriological stuff is something that was a theological idea that was invented later on within Christianity. Right. So when they're talking about being saved, they're not talking about soteriologically being saved. They're talking about deliverance, or they're talking about your portion in the world to come. And so basically they're saying if you don't become a full proselyte, you don't have any place in the world to come. Mm-hmm. So that's one segment of this Messianic group. Okay? Then you have another segment, and it tells us in verse 2, when therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with him. Now you remember these guys are coming out of Judah. They're coming from the source, right? And they're teaching people this. And Paul and this other guy runs into them, and they get into a big dispute, right? And he says, and certain of them should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles and elders about this question, right?
So they just went to the heads of it all.
So now, okay, here's this group has been sent out from Judah, right? And they're teaching this. You have these other people that's out there teaching this. They get into contact with each other and they have a big dispute about it. So now they're going to go back and say, okay, let's go back and see how we decide to approach the non-Jews. Okay? So it says, and being brought on their way by the church, and this is just ecclesia, by the way, and ecclesia just means a gathering, a group of individuals. It's not, in fact, later on, by the way, in 1 Corinthians, it talks about the congregation in the wilderness and actually uses the word ecclesia. There's a mad mob in the book of Acts, and it also calls them an ecclesia, too.
It's a gathering.
It's just a gathering, you know, of people that's gathering out or being brought out in some sense. And it says they go to this assembly, and they pass through Phoenix and Samaria. That's the northern section, of course. And it says, declaring the conversion of the Gentiles, the non-Jews, and they caused great joy unto all the brethren. So when they came in and into the northern part of Israel, they came down, they were relating what was going on to the non-Jews, that they were, you know, finding faith in the God of Israel and in the Torah, and everybody's happy. And they should be happy. And it says, and when they come to Jerusalem, they received this group, and the apostles and elders, and they declared all things that God had done with them. In other words, now they're rehearsing before all these people. And it says, before the apostles and elders, right? This is that, what I call that small Sanhedrin court that's set up by this particular Messianic group. And so they're telling what's going on with the non-Jews. But it said, but there arose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees. And by the way, all these people were Pharisees. Pharisaical ideas were simply embedded within people's lives. If it wasn't for the Pharisees, we would have no idea about resurrection and many other ideas, by the way.
Well, I think, if I may, something needs to be said about this. The title Pharisee, it's actually incorrect.
Yes.
It's Perushim, which were set aside. They were, they separated. And it just so happens that on that same book that he showed about Harvey Falk, he actually discusses this based on a whole lot more evidence. And you can go to the book to look at it for yourself. But these Pharisees were actually, they were of the school of Hillel and of the school of Shammai.
Right.
So there were two types of groups within this title of Pharisee. And we know through the sources that the school of Shammai was actually in power at this time in the Sanhedrin for the whole nation, or the people of Israel at that time. So when the book is actually here talking about Pharisees, if you know the history, you're going to find out, based on who believed what and who said what, traditionally through historical fact, you're going to find that it's not really all Pharisees, as it's trying to show in the text. It's referring to a certain group of the time that behaved in certain matters, which some say is actually the Shammai group.
Right. Some would say that. But you have these people, and he says, what did they believe, right? That it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah, or the law of Moses. Well, that's becoming a full proselyte. So that was their accepted way. If you're going to be part of this group, if you're going to have a place in the world to come, you have to be circumcised, and you have to keep the entire Torah of Moses. In other words, you become a full proselyte. And then it says, and the apostles and elders came together for to consider this matter. And so here's one side arguing this, here's the other side that's arguing that. And so now there's got to be a decision made. Right? So these people get together and let's grind this thing out and let's